When we think about preserving vintage computers, our minds usually go straight to the physical. Motherboards, CRTs, expansion cards, the beige boxes of decades past. But there's another kind of preservation that's just as vital and arguably even more fragile. That's why today on the Serial Port, we're diving into one of the most ambitious efforts to document and archive the knowledge behind these machines, a project called the Retro Web. It's a website that aims to catalog nearly every piece of personal computer hardware from the 20th century and beyond. We'll talk to the people behind it and explore how a forgotten company from the 1990s played a critical role in making it all possible. So come join us as we travel back to the past to discover how we preserve the future. In 1982, the IBM PC set off one of the most enduring and world-changing architectures that would eventually evolve into the PCs we use today. And critical to that evolution were the thousands of manufacturers that produced components from audio cards, modems, motherboards, and everything in between. But just how many unique PC components have been produced? It's not an easy number to figure out, but it's easily into the 50,000 plus range, likely a very conservative number. So given this, it would seem downright insane if someone set out to actually catalog and database all of them. But that's kind of what the RetroWeb is. It's a website with tens of thousands of PC components, from motherboards, chips, expansion cards, even floppy drives. And it's replete with photos, jumper diagrams, drivers, BIOS, and firmware. And the most amazing part, it's all volunteer run and sourced. It's a project that relies on people like you that are interested in retro PC tech. And while preserving and restoring PC hardware itself is obviously important, the information about that hardware, its configuration, physical design, software, and documentation is just as critical to preserve. It's what enables so much of this hobby, and that's what makes the RetroWeb and sites like it so important. And in our view, it's one of the most, if not the most, important preservation projects in the retro PC world. And we should say the RetroWeb isn't sponsoring this video, and we're not associated with the site nor its administrators. But it has been a huge help for us. Take this motherboard, for example. We recently picked this up at a local estate sale. We didn't know anything about it other than the model number here. Using the RetroWeb, we were able to find the exact model, get the jumper configuration, and we could even download other BIOS versions if we needed. Instead of scanning through a near useless Google search, the information we needed was right there, organized, and accurate. But where did all of this actually start? Browsing the documents for many of the motherboards and expansion cards, you'll see links to MTL jumper PDFs. They contain component locations, jumper configurations, and so on. But many of them are watermarked with a Microhouse logo. And that took us down quite the rabbit hole. Searching for Microhouse immediately brings up a ton of relevant results. We were able to pretty quickly figure out it was a company located in Boulder, Colorado that operated during the 90s. Their flagship product was called the Microhouse Technical Library, a CD-ROM set that contained thousands of board diagrams, jumper configurations, drivers, and so on. But where did all of this information come from? Who put it together and why? Well, with a little help from the RetroWeb staff, we were able to track down someone who actually worked there during the heyday of their operation. We spoke to Pat Dawson, who worked at Microhouse from 1994 until 1998. But his interest in computers started off with a Timex Sinclair 1000 back in the 80s. But that was only the beginning.
Eventually, my dad got an Apple IIe for his business, and I was just in hog heaven. I had a duo disk drive. I had, one for program, one for data. Had the amber monochrome screen and a Hayes internal 300 BPS modem.
It wouldn't be until college that Dawson got his first PC XT clone, but by the time he had completed his degree in literature, he had upgraded to an AMD 386 DX40 with 4 megs of RAM.
So at that time, AMD was like a bargain chip. The hard drive, the capacity was good. It was like 120 megs, but it was a K-Lock, which was like an off-brand. So everything was off-brand, but it ran Doom really well. Wolfenstein, Comanche, kind of all those early first-person games.
Burned out from academia, he saw an advertisement in the local paper for a technical writer position at a company called Microhouse International.
And the guy that interviewed me there, he gave me a written test. And my that K-Lock drive had died like, a couple of weeks before I took this test. I was poor. I spent like $350 on a new hard drive from Best Buy. Getting the hard drive working, I went through this whole debug process with my sound blaster, fiddling with different interrupts and address spaces. And I show up for this interview, and they're like, what did the letters IDE mean? And I'm like, integrated drive electronics. What is an IRQ? Oh, that is an interrupt. What is an address space? And I'm like, I was so upset a few weeks before that I'd spent money I didn't have to fix this computer, but it was the perfect training for this test. And guy looks at my test, he's like, you're hired. And so it was awesome.
Microhouse International was originally founded in Clearwater, Florida by 2 brothers, Steve and Doug Anderson. Steve handled the business side while Doug was the technical half. The Anderson brothers had previously run a computer store together, and as part of that work, Doug would often need the same printed materials on a regular basis, like jumper configurations from motherboard or hard drive manuals. Being very detail-oriented, Doug collected these documents together to make them easier to reference, and that's when they had an idea. Their first product, the Hard Disk Technical Guide, was released in 1990, and the company relocated to Boulder, Colorado in 1992. Along with publishing encyclopedias of hard drives, modems, network cards, and so on, they also developed software like Drive Pro. They were marketed to computer repair shops in the early versions of what we call IT departments today. And back in this era, PCs were expensive. It was frequently much less expensive to repair a PC rather than buy a new one, a concept sadly foreign to many of us today. So there was a widespread need for professionals who were adept at PC repair.
So hard drives were popular, and they would sell a hard drive encyclopedia, and then a couple times a year, it was kind of in a binder, they would send you new inserts. And so if you were a shop that was working with computers, you'd have new inserts to put in your encyclopedia every quarter.
Dawson joined the company in 1994, just as CD-ROMs had started to become somewhat affordable for the average user. That's when the Microhouse Technical Library migrated to the optical format. The tech library was a central resource for motherboards, modems, NICs, hard drives. It was all there. And the move to CD-ROM was a revelation, as you no longer had to manually search through printed papers. A simple text search could get you to the entry you needed in seconds. And the same diagrams from the encyclopedias were included, and that information was primarily sourced directly from manufacturers.
So that was my initial job, was to be an author creating these documents. And so Microhouse had a team of people, two or three, who would get in touch with the original equipment manufacturers and say, hey, we'll give you a FedEx code, ship us all of your manuals. And then once we were caught up, ship us your latest manuals. And they would send you this stuff. And so we would get batches of manuals in, and we had a team of writers, and their job was to take all of the different formats that the manufacturers used and distill them to the Microhouse format. So we would crank out the drawings in a program called Arts and Letters, and this was like a vector-based. So we had a palette of different parts. This is your 386 CPU. This is your 387 coprocessor. You had a palette of parts, and you could just kind of drop on the appropriate parts, the appropriate jumpers, the appropriate connectors, drop that finished drawing. At the time we were using, I think, Word for Windows 6.0, to do these documents, and we made thousands of these documents.
Microhouse was on the cusp of technology at the time. Shortly after Dawson joined, they obtained a T1 line for the office and used Windows for workgroups with file sharing across a 10-base-2 coax Ethernet LAN, all on diskless clients.
So we had a server with 1 gigabyte of hard disk space that was shared by roughly 30 people who ran a copy of Windows for Workgroups, Windows 3.1.1, off of an Ethernet connection. If you're familiar with the linear bus topology, it means that you've got a coax cable that goes through everybody's computer.
And you cannot break it, otherwise the whole thing goes.
Yeah, right. So that was the thing, is if somebody near the beginning of that cable kicked and the computers were on the floor, right? Beneath our desks. And so if somebody kicked their computer the wrong way, everybody downstream would scream because they just lost their work.
Represented on 4 continents, Microhouse and its partners have expanded worldwide.
The success of the technical library and their other products quickly grew Microhouse International into a multi-million-dollar company, with Dawson eventually becoming product manager.
Every quarter we would turn out a new disk, and I would pack up my tower that was, under my desk. I would pack it up, take it home on the weekends, plug it into my keyboard and mouse and monitor, and I would do the QA, for that quarter's release. Like, make sure the search works like it should, make sure all the documents load. You had to do a lot of QA on it. And so every time a new release came out, I would spend my weekend just clicking thousands of times, to make sure that these documents loaded, they displayed appropriately, they searched, they did all, because you would find sometimes they didn't. And then you would have to rerun the build process. And once we handed over that gold disc to the duplicator, back then it was like $5 or $6 a disc, even if you were doing thousands of them. It was expensive. And so the last thing you wanted was to ship out something buggy.
The Microhouse Technical Library won awards throughout the 90s. But as the World Wide Web gained popularity, the same information carefully curated by Dawson and his colleagues was beginning to be found online, posted on manufacturers' websites for free. By this point, Microhouse had developed the support source and TechCrawler websites in order to try to stay afloat with the rapidly encroaching World Wide Web. Faced with an impossible dilemma, the then COO of Microhouse, Riggs Eckelberry, orchestrated selling Microhouse to a company called EarthWeb, an internet services company, in early 1999. The technical library CD-ROMs, once the gold standard of PC repair knowledge, ceased publication as it migrated to an online Java-based product called Support Source 2000 in July of that year. EarthWeb was hit hard by the dot-com bust, just on the heels of their acquisition bonanza, which included Microhouse. In late 2000, they sold most of their business to Internet.com, with Support Source finally shutting down on January 5th of 2001, signaling the end of the technical library for good. Or was it? If you frequented any of the retro computing forums like VCFed or Vogons, you've no doubt seen references to something called Total Hardware 1999, distributed with a file name th99free.tar.gz. This was an archive of text files distributed around the web that began to appear around Y2K. It's an HTML index of nearly 15,000 devices. It's organized by device type, and clicking on a category brings up a list of devices linking to a text file, with each containing specifications and jumper configurations. The exact origins of the file are unknown, but one of the earliest occurrences was on an Ohio State University student's website. Andy Hanninger's simple text-based site linked to the file, and he maintained a list of mirrors that hosted it as well. Andy told us that he originally hosted the file on a free hosting service like Tripod or GeoCities, But after landing a student job at OSU's telecom department in May of 2001, he moved it to the university's web server, where the file eventually took off. Shortly thereafter, he was contacted by someone who said they had a full version of the collection, this one containing over 18,000 devices. This version didn't contain text files, but HTML files created using Microsoft Word 97. But more importantly, the specs and jumper configurations were now paired with board diagrams, making identifying hardware that much easier. Do they look familiar though? Aside from the missing microhouse watermark, they are identical to the ones found in the technical library. So where did these come from? There was a good deal of mystery surrounding Total Hardware in 1999 until someone called MCBX delved deep into its origins, figuring out it was indeed sourced from a version of the microhouse technical library. And it's amazing to see how the evidence they uncovered is corroborated by Pat Dawson's account of working there, from the template files to a directory named Pat and the use of network drives. Who initially published the archive on the internet is still unknown to this day. We do know microhouse software was pirated throughout the 90s, so it likely originated through this route. And it's not clear who, if anyone, still owns the copyright, given that Microhouse was dissolved and that it doesn't appear that Support Source was part of Internet.com's acquisition of EarthWeb properties. At this point, the Microhouse Technical Library can most likely be considered abandonware, which means for all intents and purposes, it is free for the taking. Which is good, because even though the tech library was created for PC repair professionals, they inadvertently created a preservation time capsule. A large portion of the data that Microhouse put together was from an era when manufacturers just had printed manuals. And even when those manufacturers established a web presence, they definitely didn't take the trouble of digitizing those old manuals. So it's not a stretch to say that the Microhouse library was literally the only repository for a vast majority of this information. And given its legendary status in the retro PC community, it wasn't long before someone came along to modernize it. In early 2019, a university student in France was in his third year of studying computer science. He was looking for an internship with the idea that he could be hired straight out of college to begin his career in IT. But having no luck in his search, he embarked on a different project, one that would revitalize the retro PC community. Deksor got into retro PCs at the young age of 13 and decided to mess around with his family's HP Vectra 486 that hadn't been touched in a decade, installing a CD-ROM drive in Windows 95, something his father and older brother had tried and failed at.
And I succeeded, actually, so I was really proud of myself. This was my first interest, I guess, into vintage computers, but then I figured out that a lot of games I wanted to play were the games I played on our first computer, which died due to bad caps. And I tried to fix it, but in the process, I managed to damage it even more by cutting 13 traces, I think, on the motherboard. Yeah, the kind of mistake you do when you are 15 and you don't really know what you are doing. So instead, I started buying other computers. Like I got a Pentium 100, which I managed to kill as well, sadly. But thereafter, I started to get more and more and not killing them at least, and fixing stuff.
Having amassed a collection of retro PC hardware, he found it difficult to find exactly what he was looking for when attempting to repair old motherboards, especially if the BIOS was missing or corrupt.
Your only solution was just to beg on Vogons for anyone having that board to dump the BIOS for you. So it was kind of a pain, and I clearly remember finding a motherboard who didn't have a BIOS ROM. I couldn't find it online either, so I begged on Vogons as everybody did back then. And of course, nobody answered.
So during his third year of university, he took matters into his own hands and started building a database based off of none other then Total Hardware 99. Using Python, he parsed through every page of the collection and started building a SQL database with the idea that he could eventually build a website that would allow it to be searched.
It took me about a month of hard work to really have a good and exploitable database. And after that, I started coding a website. But then I found an internship during May 2019, so I just moved on and didn't touch the project until sometime during December 2019, during some holidays. In my fourth year, I learned a lot more about web development, so I could really get things done much faster than before. I progressed really quick, but I didn't want to announce it because I was scared of a copycat or some type. But then I saw that post from Computer Guy on Vogons, and I was now that there is someone trying to do the same, it's about time to announce it, I guess, and maybe team up.
Initially called Ultimate Hardware 2019 and hosted on win3x.org, Deksor teamed up with another Vogons forum member, Computer Guy 08, who had proposed the same idea. As word spread about the new project, several new members came on board, including Evasive of EOHVB.com, which was the go-to resource for many in the hobby in the preceding years. Mr. Slug with his Chipset Encyclopedia, Necroware, and several other members of the Retro PC community that all contributed with their own unique data and skill sets. The site was open to the public on August 30th of that year, and it was a huge hit with the Retro PC community. Crucially, the team also figured out how to extract the original Word documents from the tech library data files, enabling them to generate vector-based board diagrams as opposed to the PNG images in Total Hardware 99, meaning the Ultimate Hardware versions could be scaled to any size without any quality loss. But with the tech library now finally modernized for the 21st century, Deksor and his team were well on their way past that initial collection, as users began submitting their own data and photos for the site. However, just a few hundred miles away in northern Italy, another project was brewing that would give the site its final form.
The most active hotspot right now is Italy.
After COVID-19 started ravaging the European continent in 2020, an Italian university student found himself stuck at home with a lot of free time.
Well, when COVID struck, I was in university, but then we switched to remote lessons. And in the free time, I just started building this website.
During COVID lockdown, Enrico started a website called The Retro Web. It was originally a blog along with a rudimentary hardware database, which was intended just to be a way of showcasing his own collection.
I think it was 27 boards, something like that. And I was looking to expand the collection over time. And as soon as I got started with collecting stuff, mainly from recovered PCs from offices, I started taking pictures and documenting stuff. And I really didn't know about Ultimate Hardware or even the original websites based on the Total Hardware database. So I just went with my own.
His start in the hobby, though, was earlier, much earlier.
I think it's all my dad's fault, to be honest. So he got my first PC when I was literally 3 years old. It was some Frankenstein laptop composed from parts from 3 or 4 different laptops. And that was my first little computer toy. And I used it for, I think, 6-7 years. And after that, I just started seeing old computers and was like, yeah, I think I can do something with that. Over time, I just kept collecting stuff without even realizing. I don't know, it was a very natural thing, just starting with old computers, and I just continued using old computers.
The site went live around April of 2020, but it wasn't long before others began adding to the hardware database.
We started in January 2021. Just the 1st of January, I opened to a few contributors from our Discord server. So basically, it was the same people logging into the admin panel and adding their own board.
And one of those contributors was Matt.
Cat. It was pretty informal. It wasn't a public thing. There was no way for some random person to come along to find us and add their stuff. It was the people who were in this group adding the stuff we had.
By this time, though, Enrico had heard of Deksor's Ultimate Hardware 2019, which had since been renamed to Ultimate Retro, and the two groups quickly became acquainted.
We were aware of them, and it wasn't a rivalry or anything. We were aware of each other. There wasn't much crossover, but we were talking behind the scenes, friends, etc. And eventually it got to the point where both were growing, and it's like, this is duplicated effort. Why are we doing this? There's pros and cons to both sides.
And despite Ultimate Retro having reached the milestone of 10,000 motherboards in early 2022, the site had been struggling with poor Google search rankings and problems with their host. It quickly became clear that combining Ultimate Retro and the Retro Web would be the best way forward.
I mean, I pushed a bit for the merger because I started working, so I didn't have much time left to develop the site actively. So we recycled the code base from Ultimate Hardware, and Deksor and Computer Guy just kept developing on the same code base without much change.
Using the name and domain, as well as the visual styling of the original Retro Web, a new site was born from the two projects in May of 2022. This ended up creating the largest and most comprehensive database of PC hardware anywhere on the internet. And the Retro Web today has transcended its original dataset many times over.
As this is being recorded, we're probably a month or two out from having 20,000 motherboards on the site.
There are times where you search a board on Google, and then the first result is our website, and then it comes the manufacturer website. It's very weird to say sometimes.
The site is growing daily, and that's because enthusiasts around the world are contributing specs, photos, BIOS dumps, documents, and so on to keep this hobby alive, not only for ourselves, but everyone coming after us. And their focus is on high-quality information. To that end, they have a team of curators that go over every single submission to make sure the photos meet their standards, information isn't duplicated, and that everything is accurate. This comes at a cost, though.
Really, the biggest challenge, I'd say, is less of a technical one. It's just actually having the capacity, like number of active curators to add this stuff, because unfortunately, our Discord submissions channel often falls behind. There's been times we've been 10 days behind, which is kind of painful for both sides of the equation, because I know there's a lot of people who want to see their stuff added. Maybe it's something they're super passionate about, for example. We found that there's people who are passionate about all sorts of different computer parts. There are people who are very strong enthusiasts about hard drives, or even dial-up modems.
Dial-up modems? Who would be obsessed with those? But given the challenges, I asked Deksor what his ideas were for the future.
I have been thinking about a lot of stuff, but we are kind of limited on the manpower. But if I had infinite manpower, I would say monitors. I would also like to do OEM computers. So we have motherboard information, we have graphics card information, we have chips information. We could pair everything together and just document OEM computer itself, maybe have software installation disks, stuff like this. It would be really, really useful. We could also do laptops, I guess.
Needless to say, there's plenty of avenues for the Retro Web to expand into. And to be fair, they have had criticism over the way submissions are currently limited to Discord and email, though they told us they are working on a better system. And while they do have logs of edits for each item, they're difficult to read, and discussions about an entry are confined to Discord, which not everyone is a fan of, especially compared to Wikipedia-style discussions that are web accessible. They're also selective about newer hardware, though this is intentional.
We do have currently a bit of a soft limit on hardware age, mostly because very old stuff is more common to have lost the documentation or even manufacturer websites, so we feel it's more important to archive that information.
And I think what is most amazing to me is that this is all just done by volunteers. Everyone who works on the site is a volunteer, from the administrators to the curators and all of the contributors.
Yeah, and it's been really great to see from it coming this really obscure thing. Like, again, started was just a few online nerds just adding their own stuff to the point where it started showing up on like Vogons or everywhere. And it's at the point where it seemed like a couple times a week I come across whatever random retro computing YouTube video I watch and someone's like referencing data, though it's on TRW. And it feels weird to be part of that. Because the original intent was not to be, the ubiquitous source for all this. It was just, hey, we like talking about this hardware. We want to document this stuff.
The site today has cataloged nearly 100,000 entries in their database, with nearly 20,000 motherboards, over 9,000 expansion cards, and just over 10,000 CPUs and chips. But preservation is not a singular effort. There are lots of other sites around with similar missions, like the CRT database, CAPS Wiki, VGA Museum, Terminals Wiki, and many more that all cover their own niche. And the work is never done, so whether you're an enthusiast or just someone with an old dusty computer in their garage, you might be able to help. So please check the links in the description below to get started. When we set out to make a video about the origins of the retro web, we had no idea where it would take us. And it's had me thinking that if it hadn't been for MicroHouse all those years ago, how much of this knowledge would have just been lost to time? And so after joining all the different pieces of this story together, I think the lesson that is really driven home is how we can all take a part in preserving history. The actions we take today matter for those in the future. What seems like worthless junk at the time may in fact be someone's treasure and entry into a lifelong hobby 20 or even 30 years from now.
Digital artifacts are ephemeral. And, like you said, we think of them as lasting, but they're not. All we need is a big, electromagnetic pulse or, some break in this long chain of civilization that we've got to make all of that stuff go away.
So from a small company called MicroHouse International in the 90s to a group of enthusiasts in 2025, we all share a passion and interest for the same thing, and we need to continue the journey. Thanks for watching the Serial Port, and we'll see you next time.